Owning a home should be a symbol of stability and security, a place where you can live peacefully, free from outside interference. But when you live in an HOA-run neighborhood with a Karen in charge, peace is never an option. And what I discovered one morning proved that Karen had gone from being a power-hungry HOA president to a full-blown scam artist. The call that changed everything. It started with a simple phone call from my neighbor, Greg. "Hey, did you put your house up for sale?" I frowned. "No, why?" Greg hesitated. "Well, I just saw your place listed on Zillow and, the price is insanely low." My heart skipped a beat. I immediately pulled out my phone, opened Zillow, and searched my address. And there it was, my house, listed for sale, at a ridiculously low price. I stared at the screen, rage bubbling in my chest, because I knew damn well I never listed my house. The fake listing, I clicked on the details, the photos, stolen from my old real estate listing, the contact email, a random sketchy Gmail address, one I had never seen before. The description, "Must sell fast, owner relocating ASAP." It was an obvious scam. But the question was, who did it and why? Reporting the fraud, I immediately called Zillow's fraud department. The representative was alarmed when I explained the situation. "This is a serious violation," she said. "We'll take the listing down immediately and flag the account." Within minutes, my house was removed from Zillow. But I wasn't done, because this wasn't just some random scammer. Something about it felt personal. Digging deeper, I started tracing the email used for the fake listing. At first, it didn't lead to much. It was just a throwaway Gmail account. But then I got a lucky break. I ran the email through an old forum search tool, something I had picked up from a tech-savvy friend. And guess what popped up? That same email had been used in the past for a Craigslist post, a job application, and a forgotten online profile. And attached to that profile was the name Richard Reynolds. My eyes widened, because I knew exactly who that was. Karen's husband, the HOA's dirty scheme. It all made sense now. Karen had always hated me. She wanted to control the neighborhood, and she had tried every dirty trick in the book to make homeowners fall in line. Now, she was taking it a step further by trying to scare people into thinking their homes were for sale. And if I hadn't caught it in time, there's no telling who might have fallen for it. But if Karen thought she was going to get away with this, she had another thing coming, because I was about to expose everything. And this time, she wouldn't be able to lie her way out of it. Karen had gone too far, illegally listing my home for sale. That wasn't just petty HOA harassment, that was fraud. And now, it was time to confront her. The confrontation begins. The next morning, I walked straight to Karen's house. She was outside, watering her perfectly manicured lawn, acting like she hadn't just committed a crime. I stopped at the edge of her driveway. "Hey, Karen," I called out. She turned, smiling falsely. "Ah, good morning. What can I do for you?" I crossed my arms. "You can start by explaining why my house was listed for sale under your husband's email." Karen froze mid-sprinkle, then just as quickly she recovered, her face twisting into mock confusion. "I have no idea what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone and showed her the proof. The Zillow listing with my home's stolen photos. The email address that linked back to Richard Reynolds, her husband. I watched her eyes flicker to the screen. For a split second, I saw panic. But Karen, she was a master manipulator. She forced a laugh. "Oh, come on. That could be any Richard." "Reynolds, you can't seriously think I had something to do with this." The lies begin. I stared at her. "Karen, drop the act. We both know this wasn't random." She sighed dramatically. "Look, I get that you're upset, but I had nothing to do with this. Maybe someone else is trying to scam you." I took a step closer. "That's funny," I said, "because when I traced the email, it linked back to a Craigslist ad from 2 years ago." Her smile tightened. "And that ad," I continued, "was for a lawn service company, registered to your husband." Karen's fake confidence wavered. Her grip on the garden hose tightened. Then she put on her best innocent face. "Oh, so now you're accusing Richard? How dare you try to drag my husband into this?" I smirked. "Karen, I don't need to accuse anyone. The evidence speaks for itself." Karen gets defensive. Her tone shifted. She tossed the hose aside and crossed her arms. "Even if, and I mean if, Richard made a mistake, you have no proof that I had anything to do with it." I tilted my head. "So, you admit Richard was involved?" Karen's eyes widened. She had slipped up. I could see her brain scrambling to recover. No, that's not what I meant." She forced another laugh. "Look, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe someone hacked his email. These things happen all the time." I let her dig her hole deeper. Then I dropped the bomb. "The legal threat, Karen, let me be clear," I said. "I've already reported this to Zillow and my attorney, and if you don't start being honest, I'll be filing a criminal complaint for fraud." That got her attention. Her face turned pale. You wouldn't," she muttered. I leaned in. "Try me." She swallowed hard. For the first time, she looked nervous. But Karen, she was too stubborn to admit defeat. "Fine," she huffed. "Do whatever you want. You won't find anything." I smirked. "We'll see about that." And with that, I turned and walked away, because I wasn't just threatening her, I was going to make sure she paid for this. Filing the official complaint that afternoon, I went straight to the County Fraud Division. I handed over the Zillow listing evidence. I provided the email connection to her husband. I explained how this fit a pattern of HOA abuse and harassment. The investigator, a man named Detective Harris, flipped through the documents. "This is serious," he said. "Listing someone's home for sale without consent is a criminal offense." He looked at me. "We're opening an official case. If your suspicions are correct, Karen and her husband could be facing felony charges." I exhaled. Finally, Karen's reign of terror was about to end, because now she wasn't just dealing with angry homeowners, she was dealing with the law. Karen thought she could lie her way out of trouble. She thought she could deny, deflect, and manipulate like she always had. But this time, it wasn't just angry homeowners she was dealing with. It was law enforcement, and they were about to tear a whole scheme apart. The investigation unfolds. A few days after I filed the complaint, I got a call from Detective Harris. "We ran a deeper search on that fraudulent Zillow listing," he said. I held my breath. "And we traced the IP address used to post it," he continued. "And," I repeated. There was a pause. Then Harris chuckled. "The listing was posted from Karen Reynolds' home Wi-Fi." I grinned. "Gotcha, Karen. The authorities show up that..." Same evening, 2 official-looking black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Several neighbors peeked out their windows, whispering to each other. 2 plainclothes investigators stepped out and walked straight to Karen's front door. The knock was loud, firm and demanding. Karen appeared a few seconds later, wearing her usual smug expression, until she saw who was standing there. "The confrontation, Mrs. Reynolds?" one of the agents asked. Karen folded her arms, trying to look unbothered. "That's me. What's this about?" The second investigator held up a folder. "We're here regarding a complaint of real estate fraud. You're under investigation for falsely listing a home for sale without the owner's consent." Karen's smirk twitched. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she scoffed. The first investigator didn't blink. "The listing was created using an email linked to your husband, Richard Reynolds. And our team traced the IP address. It came directly from your house." Karen's face turned pale. But then she recovered. Quickly, she forced a laugh. "Oh, please. That could have been anyone using our Wi-Fi. Maybe we were hacked." The second investigator raised an eyebrow. "You're saying someone hacked your internet just to fake sell your neighbor's house?" Karen shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I mean, things like this happen all the time." She stammered. The investigators exchanged a look. Then one of them said something that made Karen freeze. "Mrs. Reynolds, if you knowingly used fraudulent means to interfere with someone's property, this could be considered a felony offense. Are you sure you want to continue denying involvement?" Karen's face turned bright red. Her eyes darted to the neighbors watching from their windows. Then she made one last desperate move. "Karen tries to lawyer up. I'm not answering anything else without my lawyer," she snapped. The first investigator nodded. "That's fine, Mrs. Reynolds. We just wanted to give you the opportunity to cooperate." Then he handed her a card. "You can expect a formal subpoena for further questioning. I'd strongly advise you to start gathering legal representation." Karen snatched the card out of his hand. "You people have nothing on me," she hissed. The agent smirked. "We'll see." And just like that, they turned and left. Karen slammed her door shut. The neighborhood reacts by. Now the entire street had witnessed the scene. Whispers turned to outright conversations. She's finally getting what she deserves. Serves her right. She's been scamming people for years. She can't lawyer her way out of this one. And me, I just stood there watching Karen's house. Because this wasn't just another HOA power move. This was a full-blown criminal investigation, and Karen, she was in deep trouble. Karen had spent years abusing her power. She had harassed homeowners with fake violations. She had bullied elderly residents into selling their homes. And now, she had been caught committing real estate fraud, with law enforcement closing in and the neighborhood rising against her. Karen's empire was crumbling fast. And at the emergency HOA meeting that night, she was about to lose everything. The HOA board turns against Karen. The community center was packed. For the first time, people weren't there because they feared Karen. They were there because they were ready to destroy her. Karen sat at the front of the room, arms crossed, looking furious. Greg, the HOA treasurer, stood up. "We're here tonight," he said, voice firm, "because our so-called leader has been caught red-handed committing fraud." Murmurs filled the room. Greg continued, "Karen illegally listed a home for sale using her husband's email. That alone is a crime. But let's not forget the years of abuse she's put us through." He looked around the room. "How many of you have been fined for no reason?" Hands shot up. "How many of you have been threatened with foreclosure?" More hands. "And how many of you have been pressured to sell your home because Karen didn't approve of your property?" Almost the entire room raised their hands. Karen laughed bitterly. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I did what was necessary to keep this neighborhood in order." Greg shook his head. "No, Karen, you did what was necessary to line your own pockets." He pulled out a folder and held it up. "This," he said, "is proof that Karen has been embezzling HOA funds for years." The room exploded. The HOA fires. Karen's face turned pale. You can't just believe this nonsense," she sputtered. "I've done more for this community than anyone else." Greg didn't flinch. "We have bank records, Karen. Thousands of dollars in miscellaneous fees that never had any explanation." He turned to the crowd. "I motion to immediately remove Karen Reynolds as HOA president." "Seconded," someone said. "All in favor?" Every single hand in the room went up. Karen shot out of her seat. "You can't do this!" she shrieked. "I am this hoe!" Greg sighed. "No, Karen, you were this HOA. Now, you're nothing." Karen's hands shook as she grabbed her papers and stormed toward the exit. "You'll regret this!" she screamed. "I'll sue all of you!" Greg called after her. "You might want to save your money. You're about to need it." The class action lawsuit. Within days, multiple homeowners filed lawsuits against Karen. She was sued for fraud and harassment. She was accused of pressuring elderly homeowners into selling. She was investigated for financial misconduct within the HOA. Karen fought back at first. She hired a high-powered lawyer, tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding. But then, the financial records started surfacing. She had pocketed thousands in mystery fees. She had fined homeowners for rule violations that didn't exist. And worst of all, she had personally profited from homes sold under pressure. Karen loses everything. With legal fees piling up and her reputation in ruins, Karen was drowning in debt. And soon, she had no choice. She had to sell her house, the same house she used to control the neighborhood, the same house she lorded over everyone from, the same house she threatened others with. Now, she was forced to pack up and leave. The neighborhood celebrates. The day Karen's house was officially sold, the neighborhood threw a party. Grills were fired up. Music played. People laughed, free from Karen's rule. And Karen, she was seen one last time, sitting in her car, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. She looked out at the community she had once controlled, and now it was celebrating her downfall. With one final glare, she sped off, leaving the neighborhood forever. The final message: Karen thought she was above the rules. She thought she could lie, steal, and manipulate her way through life. But when the truth came out, she lost everything, because power doesn't protect you when you abuse it. And in the end, the community she terrorized was the one that took her down. Karen had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist for years. She thought she was untouchable, that her position as HOA president made her a queen above the rules. But now, she had lost everything. Fired from the HOA, sued by multiple homeowners, exposed for fraud, and forced to sell her house. And today, she was leaving for good. The moving trucks arrive. It started early in the morning. I stepped outside to grab my mail, only to see a massive moving truck parked in Karen's driveway. Movers were carrying boxes, loading furniture, and clearing out the house. Karen herself, nowhere to be seen. Word spread fast. Within an hour, the entire neighborhood knew what was happening. Karen was being forced out. Karen's final moments in the neighborhood. She finally emerged around noon, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scowl that could kill. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't acknowledge the people watching from their porches, didn't even try to defend herself, because she knew she had lost. She climbed into her beat-up SUV, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The victory celebration as Karen's car pulled out of the driveway. Neighbors started stepping outside. Some simply watched. Others, they were smiling. Then, as her car rolled past my house, I lifted a cold drink in the air, a silent toast to her defeat. Karen glanced in my direction, and for a moment, just a second, our eyes met. She knew exactly what I was doing, her face twisted in rage, and with one final glare, she slammed the gas, speeding away from the neighborhood she once controlled. Never to return, the community is finally free as, soon as she was gone, the neighborhood erupted into quiet celebration. People gathered outside, shaking hands, laughing. No more fake fines, no more illegal HOA rules, no more Karen. For the first time in years, the community felt like home again. The final message: Karen thought she was above the law. She thought she could bully, manipulate, and lie her way through life. But in the end, she lost everything. Because when people stand together, fight back, and expose the truth, tyrants always fall. The end, or just the beginning. Karen may be gone, but if I've learned anything, HOA drama never truly dies. Because somewhere, in some other neighborhood, another Karen is waiting, and when she shows up, you better believe we'll be ready. Lessons from Karen's downfall. The power of community and accountability. Karen's story isn't just about one corrupt HOA president. It's a universal lesson about power, accountability, and the resilience of communities. One of the most important takeaways is that abusing authority will always lead to consequences. Karen ruled through fear, intimidation, and deception, believing she could manipulate her way out of any situation. But power is not a permanent shield. When misused, it becomes a ticking time bomb. Eventually, her own arrogance and greed became her downfall. This is a lesson that applies not only to HOA leaders, but to anyone in a position of authority, whether In workplaces, communities, or politics, those who abuse power always fall when people stand up against them. Another key lesson is the importance of standing together. At first, Karen had control because no one challenged her. Homeowners were afraid of retaliation, and many suffered in silence. But once people united and exposed her corruption, she was powerless. Bullies thrive in isolation, preying on those who feel alone or unsupported. But when a community stands together, even the most powerful figures can be brought down. This story also highlights why knowing your rights is essential. Karen was able to manipulate homeowners because she made them believe she had more power than she actually did. She fabricated rules, forged documents, and weaponized legal threats, but none of it stood up to real scrutiny. Many people blindly accept authority figures' words without questioning them, but this situation proves why it's crucial to read contracts, verify information, and never assume someone in power is acting in good faith. Perhaps the most satisfying lesson is that karma always catches up. Karen believed she could control everything, but in the end, her actions turned the entire community against her. She lost her job, her reputation, her home, and her influence. No matter how much she fought, twisted the truth, or tried to manipulate the situation, she couldn't escape the consequences of her own greed. At its core, this story is about justice. It's a reminder that corruption can only survive when good people do nothing. But when people are brave enough to fight back, to question authority, and to hold bad actors accountable, justice always prevails. And in the end, the community didn't just defeat Karen. They reclaimed their freedom, their peace, and their neighborhood, because when people stand up for what's right, tyrants always fall.